A woolly bugger. I think it's a good fly to start with because you use it obviously a large hook here. And so for a newt fly tire, you don't have to worry about being really tight and precise. And there's a lot of techniques in this fly that are kind of foundational that you can build on as you get better at fly tying. Let's get started. Obviously, again, we're using a large streamer style hook. And I'm going to tie this one in black today. So I've got black thread going here. We're already lashed down to the hook, and I've moved the thread back to the bend of the hook. So let's get started. The tail of this fly is going to be marabou, and I'm going to show you a technique that I like to use when I use marabou on streamers. So a lot of people, or some people, will, when they're tying in a tail, will just clump up the marabou feather like this, and get the right length that they want, and then just tie that whole clump down like that. I'm going to show you a technique that I learned from Kelly Gallup. Uh, he's a streamer guru on the Madison River in Montana, and I think it just makes the fly look a little bit nicer. You can tie it the other way though if you want, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it's up to you. So we're going to lash this marabou feather down by the tips, and I trimmed that excess off. Work my thread forward just a little bit. And then I've got a rotary vise, so I'm going to spin it like this. I'll show you, I'll spin a couple wraps with the vise, and I'll show you doing this also without the function of the rotating vise. So I spun the vise there once and lashed down a few fibers of that feather, so we just kind of pull those out. Sometimes I'll use my scissor tips to do that. And we'll make another rotation. You can see that it's kind of clumped up right there, and so I'll just pick those out so that it looks nice and pretty. And let me show you, if you don't have a rotary vise, first of all, really look into that. It's a really nice tool to help you tie nice flies. So, but I'll show you how to tie that if you don't. You'll just manually spin this feather around with your fingers. Another nice tool for this is what's called a hackle plier, and maybe we'll show you that later. So I'm just going to spin this a few times, and I'm constantly working those feather fibers to make sure that none are pinned down. Because if you don't do that, you might as well just tie on the whole clump like I was showing you at the beginning. So I've got basically that whole feather of marabou there now tied on. I'm just kind of manipulating all those fibers with my fingers to make it look how I want. It's another tip to fly tying is a lot of your materials you're going to tie with are less fragile than you think. So to some degree, you can manipulate them and manhandle them to make the fly look the way you want. I think that a lot of beginners are a little hesitant to maneuver the materials around too much. Anyways, we've got that lashed down, and with that spinning method like that, it just makes the marabou more evenly distributed around the hook shank. I think it looks better. Next, we're going to get our hackle, and again, this is black. This is comes off of a saddle. That's like the back of a chicken, and this piece is actually somewhat stiff, but a lot of saddle fibers on a chicken are a little bit not, the feather fibers aren't as stiff. This one is, and that's one of the areas where you can really pick and choose depending on the type of fly you want to tie and how you want it to look. This one actually is fairly stiff. You can see how stiff those feathers are, but you can get some feathers that are, the fiber is longer, and it'll have more motion in the water. Totally up to you. So we're going to tie that in, and I'll just kind of lash that tip down. If this was a smaller fly, I might want to trim that or be a little more precise with it, but it's a large fly, and that's going to be totally covered up. Now I'm going to work my thread forward. With that longer hook, I'm able to put a lot of pressure on that just with leverage, and so I'm going to stabilize the hook with my other hand. And then another point is that a lot of people will use lead wire on the hook to weight the fly. I don't particularly like it, Sometimes I do it, most of the time I don't, and today we're not going to. So the body of this fly is chenille. I've got a piece of black chenille here, and we'll just lash that down to the top of the hook. I like to make sure that as I'm lashing it down, just stays right on the top of the hook. Not so much an issue with this large fly, but on a lot of other flies, paying attention to that will make your fly look better in the end. You won't have humps or clumps. The body will look even. So we've got that done. Another thing you could do is you could add a wire ribbing to this fly. I'm not going to today, but if you want to do that, you would just tie that in before you put this chenille body in. So again, I'm going to work my thread back up to the front of the hook, and I'm going to pull that down so I've got a little bit of room, and we're going to wrap the chenille. So what I do with the rotary vise is I'll hold the material over here like this, and then with my other hand, I'm going to just start spinning it. And then I can move like this to control how that material is building up onto the hook. And of course, you want it basically to just be a nice even build. Sometimes you want it to be tapered, depending on the fly. This one, I just want it to be straight. So I've got my chenille there to the head of the hook. I'm being careful to leave plenty of room from the eye of the hook to here to tie the fly off and just to make the head look nice. So now I'm going to take up the slack in my thread, work the thread back down to where that material comes, and we're going to tie it down. Just got a couple wraps on that, and then I'm going to trim that end off. Once I do that, I'll just pull off any loose fibers there, and I'll put a couple more wraps just to make sure that's secure. And now we're going to move to our hackle here. So again, just like that, the body, we're going to just wrap it around like this. I can see I've got a few fibers from that tail that are bunched up, so I'm just going to pull those out and continue wrapping. I think one thing you can do to make your flies look really nice is to pay attention to the spacing between these wraps to make sure it's even. And to me, that's just one of those details that I like to pay attention to. So now I've got that feather right to the head of the fly, and we're going to lash it down. And you can see the stem of the feather and a few of those fibers are sticking out. I'm going to trim those off and make it look like that. Now we're basically to the end of the fly. What I'm going to do is just use my thread to build up a nice head on this. And there's a lot of variations you can use on this fly. You can put a bead head on there. Obviously we didn't on this one. You could put a wing on there. You can do a lot of things. That's what's cool about fly tying. Make it your own. That's what I like about it. But this one we're going to do just a thread head. So I'm just going to build it up a little bit. Make sure everything's lashed down nicely. And try to shape the profile of that head so it looks nice. Right here I'm going to grab my whip finish tool. Pull a little bit of thread off the bobbin, and we're going to just tie a whip finish in there. I like to do 3 or 4 wraps and tie it off, and then snug that up, and then do another knot. I've seen some people who will do, several wraps, and that's fine. If you get too many, you kind of mess with the integrity of that knot. You're just not able to tie it nicely. So I think 3 or 4 or 5, probably 4 or 5 is sufficient, but I also like to do 2 separate knots, and I found that holds the fly together real nice.